This is the second part of the form checklist. Number 1. Our next question concerns beginnings and endings. Since they are among the most salient moments in a musical work, if they don't do their job, the overall form can't succeed. The role of a beginning is to provoke interest so the listener wants to go on. And the end needs to seem conclusive rather than just an arbitrary stop. I've discussed these points in videos number 29 and number 30 in this series, so I won't elaborate more here. The important thing is to understand that these are not ordinary moments like all the others. Musical form, as in any temporal art, when something happens is just as important as what happens. Another important side to beginnings and endings is their relationships within multi-movement works. I recently completed my 9th symphony in 4 movements. When I listened to the first version, I noticed that between the end of the first and the start of the second movement, there was not enough contrast. Here they are as originally composed. As the second movement starts, there are many similarities. The quiet mood, the woodwind solo is accompanied by strings, and the 3-note timpani motive. Also, the tempo isn't very different. Now here's the end of the first movement again, but now followed by what became the new second movement. Here the contrast is much stronger, since the new second movement begins with a massive loud brass and a much more assertive character. The feeling here is that we're starting something really new, not just more of the same. This is an important point when planning a multi-movement work. Another point to be aware of is that the final ending of a multi-movement work needs to be the most definitive, even more final than the endings of the other movements. Number 2. Does the overall form have a feeling of balance? Is there some kind of recapitulation to tie the whole work together? I'm not necessarily talking about recapitulation in the sense of sonata form, although that is certainly included in this category. I mean more the feeling that, over a long term, a question posed by the opening feels resolved. This may be achieved through just bringing back motivic material from earlier in the piece, repeating a part of the section we've heard earlier. It's interesting to note how classical composers sometimes use literal repeats, as in a simple ternary form, but then also began to explore ways of varying the returning material. Sometimes, instead of just stopping and starting again with a repeat, there's a more fluid transition, so it arrives in a different way from the opening. Or it might involve recomposing part of the returning material, so the listener has the feeling that the same idea now leads somewhere else. Our emotions have taken a different turn. The point here is not that every large-scale piece has to have a literal recapitulation, rather that the emotional voyage should somehow complete the story we started with. And that can't really happen without at least some reference to earlier material. Of course, in, say, an opera, a little repeat of any length would usually sound out of place at the end. The whole piece should not feel like a collection of short stories. There needs to be some overall sense that the main issues have progressed and in some way been resolved. This is a traditional narrative approach to musical composition. Some composers try to leave this behind, but it's surprisingly difficult. Now, this does not mean that there's a literal story behind every piece. When we listen to a serious piece of music, the listener wants to get involved at the start, and then to feel like the end is not just arbitrary, that it makes sense in terms of the whole. It's not an accident the vast majority of works of fiction end with death, marriage, or some other major turning point in the character's life. Imagine a novel that finished with several chapters of normal everyday activity, with nothing special happening. Would it be as convincing as the kind of novel I described above? 3. Do the proportions make sense? This is related to the previous question, and it's not an easy question to answer. There is no simple formula for satisfactory proportions in musical form. It depends on the character of the musical ideas and how much development they deserve. There is also the issue of their potential interactions over the whole piece, since interaction between ideas is a big part of musical development, as it is in a novel. For example, imagine a symphony with 2 long, intense movements at the start, and then a third movement that just lasted 45 seconds. Unless that last movement was very dramatic in some way, we feel that the whole was somehow incomplete. Or, on the other side, if one movement is much longer than all the others, there needs to be a reason why. Imagine a classical symphony that started with 2 short minuets, and then finished with a very long and elaborate dramatic movement. The listener would end up wondering what those 2 short minuets at the beginning were doing there. They wouldn't feel like part of the whole. I'm not including an example here, but I will do a lesson in the Analysis for Composers series in the coming months that will highlight these issues in a larger piece. 4. For me, the last question on the composer's checklist concerns whether the musical character is really strong and memorable. When listening to serious music meant to be listened to with full attention, I don't want a bland everyday experience. One of the many reasons we enjoy art is that it's a meaningful presentation of things that engage us emotionally. And, unlike many things in our lives, it can have a logical beginning and ending, and thus feel like a coherent whole. The experience feels just ordinary or arbitrary, but nothing special, and we're not likely to be satisfied by it. I hope these questions will help apprentice composers improve their work. As in any art, the best composers are those who constantly try to learn and to improve on what they did before. This means constantly thinking about enlarging your personal checklist for musical quality.